with Diane's, if the seed companies no longer offer my favorite seeds, which I know as a farmer I've run into more than once, where I'm on a rhythm of a certain crop for many years and then all of a sudden it goes away and I can't find seed for it. And for those who have just arrived and haven't heard, check out the chat and share in there why it's important to save seeds. Food sovereignty. It's a nice one there. There's a movie that's become one of my favorite movies that I probably watch a couple times a year with groups called Gather, and I give it a high recommendation. But it's a lot about food sovereignty. Seed saving is a big thread in there, but it's a lot about Native American food sovereignty, and it's a beautiful, beautiful portrayal.
And also for those just joining us, Michelle shared that the seeds that you will need for the program will get shipped out this weekend. So you should have them in time to plant.
All right, and we'll give it one more minute to get going. Yeah,
I
really,
love
thank
your
you.
answers. I don't need to do my presentation tonight. Bye. No,
Yeah.
there they are. Everyone seems to know.
All right, I'll start us off. Yeah, welcome to our second class. I'm excited to be sharing again with you all. I know for myself, even just like holding this thread over the past few weeks of having this course and really just bringing seed as a central theme in my life, more than even than it usually is, has been really nice. Even just like walking my garden and being in the seed row and just feeling, yeah, feeling more inspired, more seedy than usual, which has been really nice. And yeah, today's class is on the importance of seeds, and Nancy will, kind of give the lion's share of, this concept of why save seeds and kind of dive into a bit of history around seed saving and seed saving movement. And obviously, you've all devoted, a number of evenings in your coming months to this topic. So we all have reasons as to what brings us here and what kind of unites us and ties us together. And I know I've gotten to experience a lot of Nancy's wisdom around this, and so I'm really excited to hear more about what she has to share and take that inspiration on. And otherwise, we will be getting into our portion that we call Follow the Crop. And tonight's theme is ensuring a good start. And so each of us will share on the specific crops we're working with. For example, mine is the large red cherry tomato. And so we're going to get into the planting of the seeds and the preparing of the beds, a little history of the crop and how to start it, just so that we can all collectively, be prepared for when our seeds arrive and we're ready to start putting them in ground or putting them in pots, so that we can share information. And I know for myself, it's really fun to do this with a group of other growers because I have ways and practices I've cultivated over many years, as most of us here who we all have experience have. So even you guys taking the course, some of you might even have more experience than me, but we all have different ways of doing it. And there's little nuances that I can really gain from hearing other people's ways and methods. And so hopefully we'll be able to offer something of value to you all this evening. And but before we get to Nancy, I'm going to pass it off to Marielle just to share a little bit of housekeeping tech stuff.
Great. Thank you, Evan. So just a reminder, please keep yourself muted during the session. And if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat for us to go over at the end of the session, or you can wait and we will have a section at the very end for discussion and question and answer, where we'll go through all the questions that are in the chat, and folks will have a chance to ask them verbally as well. So let's get right into it. Nancy will be starting us off with her presentation on why it's important to save seeds.
So aloha mai kako, everyone. It is so wonderful to see you. I can't see you all on one screen, but I know you're on two of them. I hope your day went well for you. And before I begin my presentation tonight, I thought I would like to share a blessing that Kumakela Ching and I wrote for the first seed exchange in Kona in 2003. And so we all have kapuna. We all have kapuna that were seed savers at some point in your lineage. And we will call upon them tonight for insight and support because we are all seeds of our kapuna. So Marielle is going to put the verse up on the screen. Can everybody see that, or would you like it bigger? Bigger? So I encourage you to read along with me. This is going to be a spoken verse. And so if you're Alela Hawaii, please read along. Even if you're not, you can try. Or if not, just you can quietly read the translation on the right. So tonight we call upon the ancestors to guide us through this course and connect us with everything we need to carry on this ancient and essential traditional practice of seed saving. La'a ulu ho'a'e, mohala ka ulu, ulu la'a ulu a'e nahua. Kaupono nahua, nawe mai, na ivioka aina. Inananakupa, pili pa'apuno, no kawelua ala pono kawelua. Kaupono nahua, nawe mai, na ivioka aina. Hua ae kawelua, wailua kahua, hua hiva iho ala, ho alahia. Kaupono nahua, nawe mai, na ivi oka aina. Eo la'a ulu e. Mahalo.
Looks good, Nancy.
Pardon me?
Looks good.
Yeah, I need to remove my black bar across the top. I can't remember how to do it.
Did you have to press escape?
There we go. We need to go back. So tonight I'm going to tell a story, and the story is about what has happened with seed in the United States over the last about 250 years. And so really this is going to be a journey back into the past that hopefully will inform the present and inspire the future. And many of you may know this story. And so for you, this will be a review And many of you may not know this story. And so for you, this may be brand new information. So we'll just take a deep breath and um, move along because this is a story of public resources that are being overtaken by private resources. So why is it important to save seed? You have all of you have written something in the chat. And if you didn't get time to do that, you can do it during this presentation, and we'll take a look at that when I'm finished. So I think agriculture historians agree that, it used to be 12,000 years agriculture started, but now I'm hearing from many people, they're saying 15,000 or more years agriculture has been on the earth. So that for all that time, you have farmers and gardeners observing the plants around them, tasting them, eating them, and then observing that seed forms on them, seed falls to the ground, makes keikis, and that they can take that seed and plant it and exchange seeds with one another and move seeds to new areas. So this has been going on for the last 15,000 years, and it's only in the last about 125 years that that kind of process has changed. But even though it has changed, seed remains the foundation of the world's food supply today. So over the past 250 years, seed has slowly become a privatized commodity, and now it has been concentrated in a few hands. It seems like there's really a lot of seed out there, but probably in 1900, there was about 2 million varieties. So today there's many concerns about seed. One of the concerns that we have is since 1980, 20-year utility patents have been granted by the US Patent and Trade Office to companies and breeders. And of course, they've been spending many years to breed a new plant and to sell a new seed. And so they want to protect their new varieties and plant traits. But in this 20-year utility patent, there are no exemptions for farmers to save seed or breeders to work with those varieties. And today, some patents are even being granted for naturally occurring traits like the red color in lettuce. So by 2022, agrochemical and seed companies had consolidated into just 4 firms. The first 3 of these firms, Bayer, BASF, and Corteva, work here in Hawaii doing variety trials for future different genetically engineered seeds. And Sinochem is a agricultural, chemical, and seed company that's owned by the Chinese government. And another concern that we have is that GMO seed research is still Hawaii's #1 agricultural commodity. So here at the university in Hawaii, our public seed programs remain unfunded and understaffed, and so do our public breeding programs at the university are underfunded and understaffed. And then another big concern, of course, we always have is the failed coexistence between genetically engineered plants and seeds and pollens and other non-genetically engineered crops. So here is just a couple small charts of the expenditures that have been made public versus private research and development expenditures. So in the chart on the left, it only goes from 1960 to 1996, but you can see that just even since 1960, there has been an upward movement of private expenditures for research and development around seed. And in the other chart, the that one goes only till 2010. But if we would follow that red line, it would continue down to 2024, 2025, and the blue line at the top, the private research and development, would continue to rise. Marielle, how can I move the block of photo of people who are on my screen?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're looking at. Is there,
You should be able to minimize it in the top left corner of it.
Oh dear. Uh-oh. Can
You might even be able to just drag it out of the way from the top.
you see my screen?
yes, we can still see your screen. We cannot, but we only see the PowerPoint.
You only see the
So
PowerPoint. Thank
yeah,
you.
so it's not
Okay,
blocked for us.
right. So there's just a few seed firsts in America. These were early commercial endeavors that are notable. So Charles Dunbar, he was a gardener in Connecticut, and he is the first person to actually sell seed in America in 1767. He took out an ad in the paper for 4 varieties. The first seed company, 1784 in Philadelphia, the Landreth Seed Company, which is still happening today. In 1802, the first gardener's calendar of and catalog of 720 varieties, which was a Bernard McMahon was the gardener of this one, and he was the mentor to Thomas Jefferson. That's quite an impressive amount of varieties for the first offering. 1803, the Shakers, an offshoot of the Quakers, had the first seed mail order catalog. But it wasn't until 1923 that we had our first hybrid corn seed. Henry Wallace and George Kurtzel won the Iowa State University corn contest that year for yield. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. So those were early commercial endeavors in the United States. But alongside of that, you had the US government's Patent and Trade Office, which this is a picture of it in 1839. They began to collect and propagate and distribute seed varieties to homesteaders that were moving west and those that were just well, actually, the seed was offered to everyone. So by 1861, the Patent and Trade Office had distributed about 2.4 million seed packages free to homesteaders. Each one of those packages had 5 varieties. And by 1862, the United States Department of Agriculture was established, and it began to devote a third of its budget to collecting and distributing seeds across the United States. Here is the handwritten record of the congressional seed distribution for 1 year, 03 and 04. Sorry, going the wrong way. So the USDA seed program reached its highest volume in 1897 when there was over 1 billion packets of seed distributed to anyone who wanted to grow food for their families. Then the first commercial seed crop for widespread commercial production was produced in 1866, and it was the early Jersey Wakefield cabbage, which I still grow in my gardens. It's interesting that this cabbage has lasted through over 150 years, and it is still being produced today because it has such wide genetics and it is so adaptable to so many different ecosystems. So in 1883, just on what would that be, 17 years after the first commercial production, the American Seed and Trade Association, ASTA, was formed. And their first thing that they did was to go to the Congress and ask them to stop all government seed programs. So hybrid seed then came to the market in 1923. Before that, all seed was open pollinated. So, Glenn, can you unmute yourself and tell us what the difference is between those two types of seeds?
OP varieties are like the heirlooms, and a lot of them are what we call true to type. You the seed comes out just like the parents. On the and they also, to me, it has some resilience because there's some variability in it. You can actually select an OP that is better adapted to your place through generations of selection. On the hybrids are usually two unrelated OPs crossed together. Um, it creates some hybrid vigor. The plants become vigorous. Um, Sometimes you combine different disease resistances together, but usually you have to buy new seed. You can't save those seeds. I save them sometime because I want something in that seed, like some kind of disease resistance. I'll spend time and do that, but most people won't. It just takes too long. But that is the part. When people make hybrids, you have to buy it every year, and some of the seeds get really expensive. I mean, some seeds are up to 50 cents to almost $1 per seed. Some of the hybrid tomatoes and broccolis and cauliflower, some of the nice colorful ones now are pretty expensive. Um, so a lot of times they'll tell, and well, the other thing that's happening sometimes, and some companies will tell you that's hybrid seed, and it's not. And because they do that because they don't want you to save the seed. And sometimes I plant the seed and I said, wow, they come out exactly like the parents. Those are not hybrid seeds. But they say that so you're gonna buy more seeds. So that's the main difference. Most of the seeds that we sell at Hawaii Seed Growers Network are all open pollinated seeds, so you can save them. So that's really important. And you can still, when you buy open pollinated, you can grow them out. If you find one that you like that's different from the rest, you can save those seeds and start developing seeds for your specific environment. So that's the positive part about open pollinated seed. I think
Right.
that captures it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I know all of you when you look in your catalogs for seed and you see the F1s, so those are all hybrid seeds. And today's catalogs, there's more and more F1s coming in and less OPs. So after 2023, when hybrid seed came to the marketplace, um, it was much more profitable for companies because then the farmers had to come back every year and buy seed. And at this point, the land grant universities, the seed companies were expecting the land grant universities to do research and give them exclusive rights to those seeds. And at first, the land grant universities were not happy about that. But the seed companies that had sprung up, they began complaining that their growth was being hindered by university and the free federal seed programs, and that these programs actually constituted unfair trade practices. So eventually, what happened was the yields from the government varieties slowed, and the F1 strengthened the argument for the privatization of seed in order to foster greater food security. So in 1924, after 40 years of lobbying, ASTA succeeded in convincing Congress to cut all USDA funding for the seed distribution program. And at this point, the role of the university changed. The goal of the university being a public institution was that their plant breeding and seed programs were to basically create new varieties for the seed companies. So our government seed programs that were in the public sector and the idea of seed as a public commons had lasted 74 years. Then in the 1950s and 60s, hundreds of small seed companies started on the continent. And at one time, Jim Brubaker told me there was 100 small seed companies doing some research or grow outs in Hawaii during the winter season. So the first winter corn production was Molokai Seed Service in 1966, and then Trojan Seed on Maui in 68. At 68, also Pioneer Hybrid came to West Kauai. They are still in West Kauai today. And then starting in the 1960s and accelerating through the 80s, the larger seed companies began buying smaller seed companies in order to own their plant genetics. And in 1970, a significant act was passed by Congress called the Plant Variety Protection Act. And this gave the certificate holder the right to exclude all others from selling or using a variety to produce a hybrid seed for 20 years. But it allowed farmers to save seed from that variety and reuse that seed, and it allowed that seed to be used for research. So while there were some rights that were exclusive rights granted to the seed creators, there were also the farmers and researchers were taken into account. And then in 1994, that was amended to include asexual reproduction rights. But in 1980, there was a court case that changed the future of seed. So before 1980, there were no utility patents that had ever been issued on life, except like a substance like a B12 vitamin or something like that. Patents had only been issued on new and unique inventions that were not alive. But then came Chakrabarty versus Diamond in 1980. So Diamond, he was the director of the Patent and Trade Office, and Ananda Chakrabarty, he was an engineer at General Electric. He was trying to find a bacterium that could break down crude oil on the surface of water, because in the 1970s, there were a lot of very large oil spills on the ocean, and obviously we did not have very good ways at that time of just cleaning up the crude oil that was on the surface of the water. So he started messing around with different bacteriums, and he found this one bacterium that had possibilities. So he took the two genes that were in it and he switched them around. He put them in, he just switched their places. And then because it actually worked and cleaned up the oil on the surface of the water, he filed a patent application at the Patent and Trade Office for that, and it was granted. But then there were a lot of challenges to this. There was a lot of court suits against this because a patent had never been issued on life before. So all these suits went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court finally ruled 5-4 in favor of granting him the patent, and that the organism was alive was irrelevant. The court reasoned that bacterium was a patentable manufacture or composition of matter because it had a unique combination that was not found in nature, because he had switched the two genes. So this had huge impact. It started the biotechnology industry, contributed to the development of all genetically modified seeds, DNA, other DNA technologies came along. So we have to remember here that there were 4 judges that actually dissented from this ruling, arguing that Congress had never authorized the patenting of a biological organism. And so the court should not expand the law. But the ruling was living organisms and individual genes can be owned. And so, because of the radical nature of this new Supreme Court ruling, in the months following, 1,800 patents on life were filed at the Patent and Trade Office. And what also happened was the large chemical companies, which had just been basically selling agricultural chemicals, all of a sudden they became seed companies. They called themselves life science companies and began purchasing smaller seed companies for their genetics. Because if you could change the genes, then you could own the plants. And this would be a whole new world of possibilities for these companies. So in the next 10 years, really between 1980 and 1995, a little over a decade, a majority of the smaller seed companies in the United States were purchased by the 6 multinational life science companies. And so no other natural resource that we have has ever shifted from public to private so quickly with so little oversight. And of course, I just have to say something about the human genes because for 33 years, the US Patent and Trade Office was issuing patents on individual human genes, which would give companies the exclusive right to research and test and develop products. And it would exclude all other companies. So Myriad Genetics was given the patent on the 2 breast cancer genes, breast cancer gene A1 and A2. And what happened after that was laboratories across the United States closed down, testing and research stopped, price of services had increased. So in 2009, in response to that, what had happened with that one with those 2 genes in that one company, the ACLU and PubPat filed a lawsuit with 150,000 scientists and doctors and whatever. They were the plaintiffs. And then 4 years later, in 2013, the Supreme Court ruling was reversed. So human genes are products of nature and they cannot be owned. However, plants and animals and microorganisms can still be patented. That means they can receive a exclusive utility patent for 20 years that excludes all farmers from saving seed and all other researchers from using that seed for research. It can be patented if at least one gene is altered. And then this is where we are today. Well, this is 2022, but this is basically what it looks like now. There hasn't been any new consolidations of these industries. The 4 big industries that control seed in the world, that control 70% of all seed varieties in the world, are Bayer, BASF, Sinochem, and Corteva. So here at the top on the right-hand side of Bayer, all these little circles are the companies that they purchased. Some are seed companies, some are agricultural chemical companies. And then on the left side is Bayer purchased Monsanto in 2018, and Monsanto brought along with it all of these companies, seed companies and agricultural chemical companies. So Bayer today is the largest agrochemical and seed company in the world. All of these companies have corporate offices in every large city in the world. Then the BASF, everything to the right of BASF was purchased by them. Those are all of their companies. Sinochem down below, this is a corporation of the Chinese government. It bought Syngenta, it bought ChemChina, and it consolidated all those agrochemical and seed companies into one. And then the last one, Corteva, who does quite a bit of work on Kauai, that was a consolidation of the Dow and DuPont. So this is pretty much where we are right now. Then in the late 1980s, both in America and at the United Nations, they started issuing reports about the alarming loss of the biodiversity in food crops since 1900. So the UN report came out in 1996. It looked at world crop diversity of all of these different crops, and they found out that there was a 75% loss in variety since 1900. Then the National Geographic report in 2011, which some of you are probably familiar with, they wrote a story called The Food Ark, and they were using the research of Carrie Fowler, who had gone into the National Germplasm Repository in Fort Collins, Colorado. That's the main seed bank for the United States. And he had done some research in 1983 on how many varieties that were grown in 1900 were still available in 1983. And he had put that loss at 93%. So this was the graphic that came out of the National Geographic report. Maybe some of you have seen it. They looked at every single kind of fruit and vegetable. These are all just vegetables here. But you can see on the chart how many varieties were available in 1900 and how many varieties were then available in 1983. It's a considerable loss. So that was 93%. Then the Seed Savers Exchange, they every 5 years, they come out with this incredible book called their yearbook, and they list here all of the varieties by type of fruits, vegetables, grains, and herbs that are available in the US today. In 2011, there was 21,000 varieties. So they figured that this represented about 3 to 5% of the varieties that were grown in 1903. And I figured that out to be about over 2 million. So we'd gone from 2 million to 21,000. So, but that was a long time ago. So I started doing research and looking into, can I find what people are saying today as far as what kind of loss of crop diversity do we have today? And I found a pretty incredible report that was done in 2021. It was a study by 15 seed researchers called Crop Genetic Erosion, Understanding and Responding to the Loss of Crop Diversity. And I have put that full report in your Class 2 resources folder. It's 35 pages long, but it is fascinating because this is the latest kind of look at where we are. And although they had found that there were market losses in all categories and no percentages were given, unlike the last two reports that I was telling you about, but they found that increased maintenance of seed varieties and increase in diversity of the F1 varieties were happening pretty much across the board. And it outlines steps of how we can take actions to stem further losses than what we have already. So I just want to finish by saying that, this movement of seed from the public realm to the private realm has taken a long time. It's been at least, almost 100 years. It didn't move quickly. But now that things have become consolidated, and you can see for yourself that when you look at a new seed catalog, how many F1s there are today and how many OPs there are today. So there's less and less OPs, more and more F1s. that you cannot replant true to type. So in that way, it is extremely important for us here in Hawaii to continue working with our open pollinated seeds and adapting, improving, and strengthening those crop traits that are very well suited to Hawaii because we have extremely diverse environments here. And really, one of the goals of the Hawaii Seed Growers Network is to strengthen the foundation of our community food system and lessen the need for long distance shipping, which I read all of that in the chat before we started. Uh, all of you are very aware of that. And the second thing would be preserving ancestral ecological seed production knowledge. There is so much knowledge that, and you will be getting a lot of this knowledge just by going through these 4 seeds this year and taking them all the way from seeding um, to the seed processing and drying and replanting. So this idea of genetic diversity, which really is the foundation of agroecology and locally adapted seed, that is our main goal. And why are we doing this? We are doing this, of course, to protect our food security, for the common good for everyone in Hawaii, for our home gardeners who are really form a very important part of our food system and for future generations. And we know that when we eat fresh food, not food that has come in on the boat and has taken 3 weeks to get here, that the nutritional quality is higher. And so our health will also reflect that. But we have discovered over this long period of time that seeds are a very vulnerable resource that must be respected and stewarded and enhanced in their long-term viability and integrity. And one of the things that we do and that we'll be doing this year with our seeds is working with the plants who will be using their epigenetics. The epigenes are those little molecules that hang off the DNA, their DNA ladder. And those molecules respond to the environment that the seed finds itself in, the plant finds itself in. And the plant then can turn some of its genes on and turn others off to respond to new environmental conditions. So this really is a way to work with these OPs for the climate change challenges that are going to be facing us in the future. And of course, this is, thank you, Glenn, for local seeds for local needs. That is who we are. I am going to get out of here. Can I? Nope.
Press escape.
Yes. No, it's not letting me. Can you help me, Marielle?
Let me try.
I see.
Got it. Thanks so much, Nancy. Really wonderful. And I think that some folks are sharing in the chat that it's really an eye-opening presentation in terms of changing and shifting our perspectives about why this work is so important and the history. So thank you, mahalo for that context.
I just want to add one more thing, and that is that this story that I told tonight is a very, very small portion of the whole story. There is so much more to this story, and a lot of the resources in the Class 2 folder address certain aspects of this story. And so if you're interested in any of those, you can go into that folder and do further research. So thank you for your attention.
Mahalo. All right, we're going to move into the follow the crops section about how to ensure a good start for your plants. So we'll be talking about planting seeds and preparing beds with each of the farmers who will be giving presentations today. So we'll be getting started with Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. And that was just really amazing, Nancy. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's always a little overwhelming to hear about the loss, and also at the same time inspiring to know that there's something we can do about it. So let's get started. You know what? I'm actually going to turn off my screen because I want to protect my bandwidth and make sure I don't have a lag as I go through this. So I'm going to stop my screen. So Britton and I are going to be sharing about saving seed from Carolina kale. Carolina kale is also known as Ethiopian kale and by its scientific name as Brassica carinata. Technically, Carolina kale, oh, we can stay on that one for just a moment there. I'll tell you when to skip. Thank you, Marielle. So technically, Carolina kale is a mustard, and it's actually very closely related to kale. Carolina kale dates back to 4000 BC, so that's just over 6,000 years ago, and was widely used in Africa for its mild leaves, but also for the very high oil content of the seeds, which can have up to 45% oil content, depending upon the conditions in which you cultivate it. Because of the high oil content, Carolina kale is actually being studied right now by the University of Florida for its potential use in biofuel production. And I think we know where that leads based on what Nancy just told us. So next slide, please. So this slide is describing the triangle of U, which shows the 6 major Brassica species and how they interrelate. This theory was put out in 1935 by a Korean-Japanese botanist named Woo Young-chun, and this slide brings up an interesting point that I want to address. Now, most of the crops that we're working with during this series, lettuce, tomato, and beans, these are all self-pollinating crops. Carolina kale is not a self-pollinating crop, but is actually an outcrosser, meaning that they need multiple plants of the same species for good pollination and genetic preservation. And this is actually how Brassica carinata came to be. So Carolina kale is an open pollinated cross between Brassica nigra and Brassica oleracea. Now, this is thought to have been a natural hybridization that happened 6,000 years ago. So Brassica nigra is a black mustard that was cultivated for seed and is native to warmer regions of the world like the Middle East, the Ethiopian highlands, and Southern Asia. Crops in the Oleracea family are temperate crops that come from cooler regions, and those include the brassica, the crucifer crops that we know, like cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. Interestingly, Gailon is in that family. Also, the kales that we're very familiar with, lacinato, red, curly, rainbow, these are all in the Brassica oleracea family. And this diagram brings up an important question that we have to think about when saving Carolina kale. Can the 6 species of Brassica cross-pollinate? Now, there's a lot of different opinions out there, and there's a lot of nuanced information around this, but the short answer is yes. Yes, they can cross. And it's helpful to know that some species are more likely to cross. And actually, it's typical and very common to see a small amount of crossing happening, even in open pollinated situations. So breeders have been working with these brassicas to develop new fun crosses that you can see in the Johnny's catalog. There's lots of hybrids out there that they're working on. Most bok choys are actually in the Brassica rapa family, and they can cross with Carinata. Also, kai choi, which is grown a lot out here in Hawaii, that's a Brassica juncea, and that can also cross with Carinata. So you do want to be careful when saving this seed if you have those flowering in your area or in your garden. Okay, next slide. So that brings us to population and isolation needs. Knowing the number of seeds that need to be planted to get a quality pollination set is really important in seed saving. So this sheet also shows us isolation distances that are needed for isolation requirements that will help you to avoid unwanted crosses when saving seed. For me, this is a go-to sheet. I have this printed out. We have it as a reference for you in the Class 2 resources folder. I recommend downloading it and printing it out. This is just one page. There's actually 4 pages of this sheet, and it goes through all of the common crops and will give you their Latin names, and the isolation distances you need, and how many plants you need to save from in order to capture either the genetic preservation of your crop or the variety maintenance of your crop. So if you look on here, you can see kale. So that's in the brassica family. We need to save from a minimum of 80 plants. 80 plants to capture and preserve the larger set of genetic information. Now you can save from smaller quantities, that is okay. For variety maintenance, they recommend 20 to 50 plants. And that is really if you're looking to save a specific variety rather than preserve the larger set of genetic makeup. So for Britton and I, since we have access to really large fields and we can manage this, we are going to focus on genetic preservation, and we will save seed from 80 to 100 plants for this project. But for most of you, we don't expect you to save these high numbers. If you can save seed from a minimum of 5 plants, if you could reach 20 plants, that would be great. But after the grow outs, we are going to be gathering seed back from everyone, and we will combine these lots so that we can capture as much genetic information from your different climate zones as possible. And that will all be pulled together and made available to all the home growers in Hawaii. Okay, next slide, please. Soil blocking. Now, this is how we start our seeds on the farm. If you don't want to try soil blocking, you can just start your seeds in trays or 4-inch pots with a similar potting mix to what we use, or if you know you have something that really works for you, go ahead and use that. We think soil blocking is great for a number of reasons. And a few of those reasons that we love soil blocking is because, number one, it lets us cut down our plastic use. This is a picture from Johnny's. That's not our plastic tray. We don't use those plastic trays. We make wooden cedar trays to hold our soil blocks. And we just love that because we can use it we can reuse them. You know, we've had them for generations now, and they hold up really great. Also, the soil blocking really helps us to control our moisture content in our starts. So we are located in Puna, and this is a very humid, very wet environment. And too much water in your starts can cause a big problem with a rich bacterial and fungal environment that will create dampening off and wilt issues right off the bat. Another reason we really love our soil blocks is because it gives us a timing flexibility. When the roots grow to the edge of the soil block and hit the air, they stop growing so fast and go into a wait mode that they call air pruning. So we can end up with an extra 2 weeks before our soil blocks actually have to go into the field. And that can really help with our planting timing, depending what's happening, you know, if we're having a storm or winds or any reason that we don't want to plant right then. So this is the formula that we use when making our batches of potting mix. And like I said, because we live in such a wet environment, It really makes a big difference for us to start our seeds with a sterile mix. So we use that sunshine number 4, and that ensures we aren't introducing any harmful pathogens to our seedlings that will cause dampening off, wilting, root rot. We've had this happen to us, and we've tried reusing our soil. And for us, it just is a lot safer to give our seedlings the best start we can with a sterile mix. So we use that sunshine number 4, and then we incorporate a variety of amendments into our mix for mineral and fertility support. Now, this recipe that I have here, this is for a 10-gallon mix, and you could decrease and scale the ingredients to suit a smaller planting. So I want to let you guys know too that we have included a really important handbook written by the infamous organic leader, Amigo Bob, called Know Your Soil. So this is in the Class 2 resources folder. And for me, this is like a little soil Bible. I recommend printing this out and spending as much time as you can with this booklet, and it will really give you so many in-depth details about how to use phosphorus, calcium, potassium, nitrogen. It goes through the gamut and will help you understand amending your soil. We have a short video that we're going to use to show you how to use the soil blocker and make your soil blocks that we'll go ahead and do right now. So Britton is going to, hold on one second, Marielle. Britton is going to talk about this. So I just give him a moment to
I'm ready.
unmute him and be ready. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. Hey, everyone. We went through this video quick, but just for those of you who haven't made soil blocks before, this is how we make it. So we have a short video for this. We like to mix all our materials dry first, adding some of those amendments you saw and the dry sunshine mix in a wheelbarrow, or sometimes when we're making very large batches, we'll do them on a tarp and roll the tarp back and forth. At this point, after I've applied all of our amendments, we'll kind of mix everything by hand. I've also seen farmers use like cement mixers and things. I prefer using my hands or a tarp. Just a short video of the different amendments we do use in our soil preparation, seed preparation mix. And then this is one of the most important parts is moisturizing your mix for making soil blocks. If you've never used soil blocks before, you want to get a real uniform moisture content and make it where it's like you can squeeze a little bit of water out, but the soil is going to hold. And then here, Michelle is starting to use our stand-up soil blocker. There's multiple types of soil blockers you can purchase from Johnny's. We like the stand-up blocker. It makes a lot of blocks very quickly. And then once you've made your blocks, you have those little dimples and you can start putting your seeds in. As mentioned, we're doing a large crop of carinata in order, since we have the space and to preserve genetic diversity. We have really high germination rate on this carinata kale, so we only put 1 seed in per block. If your germination rates are a little lower, you can sometimes put 2 to 3 seeds in the block. Here's an example of our bird protection in our nursery. Birds are a super nuisance, as many of you know. Real simple on our trays, some wire and some agribon keeps everything safe and protected in the early days. And then once the seeds are up and sprouted up, we want to start doing some of our thinning process. If we maybe dropped an extra seed into one of the blocks, we want to take that out. Also, as you saw there, we pulled out one of the kind of the weaker seedlings. So this is like our first stage of roguing. This is your first, moment in time when you're going to start roguing your crop. If 2 seeds have come up, you can either cut or pull them out, depending upon how careful you are in pulling, so you don't pull both out. You're looking for any like off color, anything that doesn't look right. If there's any type of wilting, just use your best judgment in this first moment of roguing. So that's what's happening here at this timing of the sprouts. We're looking for good vigor, good, green color, no yellowing. And then here we have, pre-transplant, and we'll get more into the transplanting process in a couple weeks. But just showing the moisture content of our soil blocks, and you can see where, another value of the soil blocks is you don't have any type of uh, root binding. That air pruning is really valuable in buying time with the soil blocks, and they stay strong and healthy. And as Michelle was saying, it is one of our biggest issues in East Hawaii, particularly overwatering starts. I was just at the site today, Go Farm, and there was some overwatering going on, and yeah, immediately you start to have some wilt and dampening off. So be really mindful of that. I'm sure many of you guys are gardeners and growers. That's why you're here. And you all have your particular way of starting things. So this is, again, we're all just sharing what we do and how we do it to give you guys a taste of that. Don't try to reinvent your wheel. I don't want you to all like go out and buy a soil blocker. You don't need to do that to successfully grow Carinata, but we just want to share with you our technique and how we do it. I think there was a question about what size soil blockers do you recommend? I saw in the chat, and that really varies on your what you're focused on. For many years, we just used the handheld soil blockers. They come in a few different sizes. We found over the years we prefer the smaller type soil blockers, just because it's a little more efficient for us and making large batches. And we eventually were able to move all to the stand-up type, again, for doing larger batches. So yeah, I'll hand it back over to Michelle. I think there's just a few more slides to go through.
Great. Thank you so much, Britton. Okay, I just have two more slides here, and then we will be moving on to the next farmer. So when saving seed, it's all about selection. So when we do our seeding, we double the required amount of seeds that are needed to save from. So that gives us a chance to start our selection process right at germination. So considering our goal is to save seed from 80 plants, we planted 160 seeds in our cells and holes. If you're saving from 5 plants, go ahead and seed 10 plants and then select your 5 best. The germination rate for the Carinata kale that we're sending you is 97%. So it's definitely safe to only plant 1 seed in each hole. I just want to say it's really important to protect your starts from slugs. Please keep your starts up off the ground. That is critical. Use a bench or a table. Like Britton said, we use Agribon. You can buy that at Johnny's. That's really great for protecting from birds. Birds are probably our biggest issue as far as critters getting into our crops. But you can use screens or clear plastic, whatever works. Agribon lets light and air flow through. So that's nice for us. And maintaining the moisture is super critical. Like Britton said, we want to see our soil blocks drying out on the surface in between waterings. If we don't see that, we won't water. Sometimes during rainy weather, we can, even though our seedlings are protected, we don't have to water for days because our environment has enough humidity in there, even if the top is looking a little bit dry. When using soil blocks, it's really important to use a fine volume misting spray. We have a picture of a faucet up there. You can use a regular hose nozzle, but if you use that on your soil blocks, you'll probably just drench them and they'll all blend together. I don't recommend making that mistake. The faucet is great. It's lasted me for about 20 years, definitely a good investment. But I want to say when you do water, make sure that you give a thorough water. Saturate your blocks, especially around the edge of the trays where it tends to get more dry, and then let them dry out so that you have that flex happen in your soil. So Britton showed in the video, we talked about selecting. For us, we are removing anything with a weak stem. So that's one of the things that I want you guys to focus on when you're looking at your seedlings. If you see any weak, thin stems, get rid of those, pull them out. Misshapen leaves, yellowing, go ahead and cull them so that you are only left with big, plump, juicy sprout leaves that are dark green and have a thick stem. Okay, next slide. Okay, while your starts are growing, it's time to get your field ready for planting. Now, you want to be sure to allot enough planting area to match the population requirements, and remember to look at the isolation requirements also. Consider where you are when thinking about that. If you're in a neighborhood, it's going to be different than if you are in a rural area. So Carinata kale can grow to be a very large plant when given enough fertility. You can expect 6 to 8 feet in height, a width of 3 to 4 feet. So you need to have enough space for your plant to reach its full potential at the seeding stage. If you're setting out 5 plants, you're going to need at least 15 feet of bed space to set them up at a 3 foot interval. So because we're saving from 80 plants, we'll have 300-foot long beds, and that'll give us about 30 extra plants to cull in the process. Seedlings are typically ready after about 14 days, and having your fields ready are going to prevent you from having to step up your plants into 4-inch pots. That'll make you, have more labor, use more soil potting materials. So you want to try to be ready and have that set up. We're going to talk more details next week about getting your fields ready. So yeah, we'll go from there. Thank you so much.
Hello, Michelle. All right, we'll be moving on to Evan's presentation on the large cherry tomato.
Thank you, Brittana and Michelle. That was really informative. And yeah, seed stewardship, nurturing a resilient future, which is, I guess, for me, it's the why save seeds is to nurture a resilient future for all of us here on planet Earth. But let's go to the next slide, which is the chart that Nancy showed. And I love that you had some follow-up to this in terms of recent information, because I've used this a lot in classes over the years, and it stops in 1983. And my guess has always been that we're increasing since 1983 diversity, and more seed stewardship going on, and small seed companies happening, and a lot of inspiration happening in the seed saving movement, particularly in the past 10 to 20 years or so. But I wanted to just look at the tomato on here because I'm talking about the large red cherry tomato, which is an heirloom variety. And in 1903, this was at 408 varieties of tomatoes that dwindled down to 79. And just a note on the 79 is I'm not really convinced that there were 79, but these were the findable ones, the accessible ones, because these didn't count, what auntie and uncle's families had brought over from Italy and traveled throughout the world. And so there's so many families that are cultivating still to this day varieties that aren't even known that are out there, or they're sitting in some family's freezer or refrigerator because, great grandpa grew them, but nobody grows anymore. And so there's a lot of power in stewarding these varieties and continuing to further them. Next slide. And the large red cherry tomato, we know of because of this man here, Ben Quisenberry. He died in 1986 at the age of 99 years old. And I think it was 1911 is when he started seed saving. He was about 24 years old when he started seed saving. He credited his lengthy life to his passion of being in the garden and having a connection with the garden as a connection to God. And tomatoes were his main focus. He had big tomato gardens. It was a mail order seed company that he carried for decades that ran out of an old post office in Syracuse, Ohio. And so one of those varieties that came out of that was the large red cherry. A couple other varieties that maybe people have heard of, the mortgage lifter, which is still very common in market gardens. Market garden growers are growing it, and then the brandywine tomato, which I really loved finding that out because that's my home watershed where I grew up, and so where that tomato was discovered and found, and so he stewarded that. And he had an interview when he was about 95 years old, and he shared that when he was 93, he ended up having to go in the hospital. And in his time in the hospital, he lost 22 of the 31 varieties that he had propagated that year. So he was, scouring the lands for more varieties of tomatoes and had these 31 varieties that he, had taken on to steward, and 22 of them he lost just like that. And it really shows the power in community in seed saving movement because when, something's happening like what we're doing right now, which is we're all going to grow out this large red cherry tomato. I can lose my crop, but because other people are growing it, it'll continue, it'll perpetuate. And so, we have a lot of these seed stewards to thank that have kind of carried it single-handedly, a lot of these varieties for so long. And now we're in a world where we can kind of expand the community, which gives us a lot greater opportunity. Next slide. And the large red cherry tomato, this is a picture of them, but they're 1 to 2 inch large cherry tomatoes, just to clarify that they're cherries. And it's an indeterminate variety, which means that it will produce a lot of tomatoes over a long season. Particularly, if frost comes in, winter comes in, and a temperate climate, that's going to limit its season length. But for us, we probably are harvesting close to 6 months off of our plants each year commercially for the large red cherry. And by the time we get to the last, 2 months or so, we're in the rainy season. There's late blight setting in, so our harvest dwindles through time, but we're still able to pull off good harvest from it. It's a very flavorful tomato. I know as a market grower, people at farmers market all the time are asking me, are these tomatoes sweet? Are these carrots sweet? And the word I like to use is flavorful. I feel like sweet is a gimmick when it comes to food, that it's really easy to produce sweet things, but can we have a good full flavor to it? And the large red cherry really has a nice full flavor, and it's highly productive. It's ready 75 to 80 days from transplant. So we're all going to start ours in the nursery. Time we get them in the field, we're looking at close to 3 months till they're actually ready to harvest. And so just a note on that I want to mention is some of these other varieties, the three other varieties we're working with over the course of this course, are going to go a lot quicker. And with that in mind, what I encourage is that when you do get your seed, it's like one you want to kind of jump on getting started sooner than later. And it's really versatile. It's excellent fresh. It's excellent frozen or canned. We use it for salsas, chopping it up, making salsas out of it. Oftentimes at the end of our tomato season, we'll just bag whole bags of them and throw them in the freezer, and then we'll make sauces with them over the next few months that we don't have tomatoes coming out of the garden, which is really nice. Next slide. And talking about fertilization, which is going to be really relevant for the care of these plants. So tomato is Solanum lycopersicum, which is in the Solanaceae family. So it's a nightshade, similar to tobacco or potatoes, eggplants, all in the nightshade family. And it has male and female parts built into the same flower, which is very similar to a lot of the crops we're working with in the cycle. Is open pollinated varieties. They don't cross pollinate readily, but they can cross pollinate. And because you guys are home growers, it's important to have that consideration because you might already have some tomatoes in your garden. And so, getting into what Michelle was talking about, next slide, with the isolation distance and the importance of that. With tomatoes, they I guess Nancy's going to talk about the beans, the pomojo bean, and beans before the flower even opens, oftentimes are self-pollinating themselves by the time the flower even opens. With tomatoes, it's not the case, and so they have the male and female parts built into the same thing. So they have the stigma and the stamen. Stigma being the female organs there leading down to the ovary, and the stamen being the male, with the anther being the pollen sac on the end. And so inside that little flower, I don't even know what you call that casing of the whole thing, are both the male and female parts. Now, depending on how long the stigma is of any given variety, depends on how readily it will pollinate itself. And there's a big history in tomato breeding that goes back hundreds of years where they intentionally chose varieties that the stigma was short to increase the chances of self-pollination, for to perpetuate the varieties. And this is, we're talking indigenous culture in Ecuador and Peru. So they selected for these short stigma varieties. And what needs to happen is that pollen needs to find its way into the stigma. And there's a couple different ways that happens. Most of the time, it is through wind that happens. And so if you don't have a lot of wind, it's not necessarily readily going to happen. You can end up with a low pollination, which means lower production. The other way is bees. Bees aren't necessarily super prone to visit tomatoes when there's other things going on that are more exciting. But they do get in there, and it's the buzzing of the bee, it's the vibration when they buzz and move their body, particularly bumblebees or the carpenter bees that we have here. As they buzz, they can cause that pollen to drop and find its way into the stigma. So cross-pollination can be an issue that can happen. Next slide. And and I think I might have this on a later slide, but we're looking at as far as like an isolation distance, 10 to 15 feet is generally going to be good enough for the purposes of what we're doing for our seed saving project, but also Hawaii Seed Growers Network. There can be some natural cross pollination that happens though in that 10 to 15 foot isolation distance. It's what they find statistically, it can be about 3% of genetic transfer that could happen if we go within that range or closer than that range. But for seeding these plants, we use 3 to 4 inch pots for our tomatoes. We kind of the same thing. It depends on the tomatoes and depends on germination rate. I'm actually not sure what the germination rate is on these tomatoes. I grew this seed out in this past cycle, and if I took a guess, it's in the mid 80s or so, mid upper 80s for what the germination rate is. So you should get pretty good germination that you could do one seed per pot if you are planning to go big. You'll probably have more than enough seeds that you could do 2 seeds per pot. And if you do that, I kind of like to use the peace sign to make my holes so that wow, I had balloons come on my thing. I have no idea why. Maybe it was the peace sign. Maybe it was something someone pressed. It wasn't me, but anyway, yay peace. But I like to do it so yeah, it was that. Um, so that the holes are separated. So I don't put 2 seeds into the same hole. I separate them because if for some reason you get low germination, you lose some starts, you can always divide the plants into two. But generally, what I'm looking for in that 4 inch pot is one really good, strong, healthy start. I don't like to divide starts if at all possible because I'm taking roots that are tangled in each other and I'm pulling them apart, and it's a form of trauma. And ideally, what I'm doing is ideally, I would plant seeds directly in the soil, but because there can be a lot of pests and damage that can happen in the field, is why we're doing the pots. And so, with doing the pots, what I want to do is make it so that it's pretty seamless, the transfer from that pot to the ground itself. But we're looking at a 2 to 14 day germination rate. I know our seeds actually we started sometime in the past month, and it took close to 20 days for us, and that was really cold weather that we're experiencing at this time of year. We're up at 2,100 feet on Maui, so if it's colder, the germination could take a little bit longer. I actually got to a point that I was a little worried, like, are these starts not coming up? I have to stay ahead of everyone, but no, they came up really nicely. And we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks in the nursery before transfer. What you see in this picture would be a minimum that I would be willing to transfer my plants. I know for us and the way our nursery works is that if we get them in the field quicker, they're going to grow a lot quicker. But for some of you guys, your nursery situation might be different, that you're used to getting nice, tall, 1 foot tall tomato plants. And so it's kind of going to be up to you in terms of at what point you transfer them. And soil mix, for those that don't want to make their own mix, there's Fox Farm Ocean Forest that I know on Maui at least is sold at most of the nurseries. It's a really nice amended, um, balanced potting soil. It's just pricey for what it is, but for us here on the farm, we use Pro Mix. We amend with our farm-made compost. We amend with worm castings, fish meal, oyster shell, and I wrote perlite on there, but that's actually not true. That's what we use for potting up. That's a whole different. So sorry about that. And yeah, so similar to Michelle and Breton, we're getting a base of Pro Mix. We're using the MP, which is it's an organic Pro Mix that has mycorrhizal in it, and then, yeah, hole wise, we're looking at 1/4 inch deep holes. We like to inoculate our seed with mycorrhizal. Historically, or not historically, but scientifically, one spore of mycorrhizal will inoculate the plant for its life. And so that allows, that web of mycorrhizal fungi in the soil to grow with the root system of the tomato plant, which can then support it harnessing moisture and harnessing nutrients in the soil. And so, because we're looking at like home garden setups, it's kind of easy to do that. Just get a little powdered mycorrhizal, just put, a little sprinkle in each hole. You could do that. And while they're in the nursery, you can water in your starts with fish fertilizer once per week, which will help the growth. Next slide. So we're getting into design and site selection, which we'll talk more about in the next class in terms of establishing the beds. But I wanted to include it because what it considers here is just the individual plant, because we're looking at tomatoes and we're looking at tomatoes that are going to climb up a trellis. They could get 4 feet, 6 feet tall, depending on how big you let them. Can even go taller than that if you wanted to go taller, but I don't want to harvest any higher than, about my head height. And so wind can be a factor. So just consider setting your garden up in a place that it's going to be protected from the wind. So it's not running the risk of getting blown off the trellis itself. And sun and shade, it likes full sun, but for the nursery time, not necessarily having full sun for the full time, particularly if you're in lowland areas, can negatively affect the crops, dry them out prematurely. Um, Water in the nursery. I know in the last class I showed a picture of our nursery setup, which is we have misters above our plants for our nursery setup. We don't actually do our tomatoes in our nursery. We have a separate area for them that gets partial shade and it's sitting on tables. And we don't do it under the misters because tomatoes are really prone to late blight, like all nightshades. And so the Irish potato famine, if you guys are familiar with that, and so we don't want to promote that. And so what we found is under our misters, it's a very moist environment. These plants, these baby plants are prone to getting late blight when they're really, really young. And so instead we put them out in a separate area where we can, again, get the soil nice and moist before we seed, which is kind of the moisture level of a wrung out sponge, and then a little bit more. Is what we're going for. And then from there, we're just monitoring when we need to water and watering as little as possible. And because we're cool right now, because there's partial shade on these plants, because we've had a lot of wet times, there's created a lot of moisture in the air. Even though they're not getting rainwater directly on them, they're protected, they're covered. We haven't had to water them in about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And the moisture is still really good in the pots. Considering existing vegetation so that the plant has room to grow. Consider the pests that you might be dealing with. So prepping your garden in terms of that, and so that the plant can grow up and not get bitten by something or taken out by snails or slugs. And obviously working your soil and slope. Next slide. And where do we go? Oh, okay. So bed preparation, we're going to talk about next week, but just wanted to do some leads because some people are going to be getting their garden beds going. And for us, we're looking at a 2 foot spacing on our plants, but we do 2 rows in a 30-inch bed. Some people might choose to do just 1 row in a 30-inch bed. Our way has just been 2 with a beefed up soil and a trellis in between them that we'll talk about next week. Yeah, that isolation, that 10 to 50 feet from other varieties. Population size, minimum, we're looking at 5 to 10 plants for saving seed for preserving a variety. And, as Michelle mentioned, because we're all going to be pooling our seed together, then we're actually going to be getting, like, I don't know, 200 to 400 plants that we're working with collectively. Thinking about a windbreak, thinking about the soil fertility, getting that established. Irrigation, I'm writing drip preferred. Same reason with the late blight. If we're looking at overhead sprinkling on our plants, it's going to increase the chances of late blight. And for us, right now, I'm early getting our tomato plants started. We generally do we'll seed usually at the end of February for our summer season of tomatoes, because if we get them going too early and we're still in heavy rains, we can get late blight on them. And so yeah, preferring the drip irrigation and then considering what staking options you might want. And we'll look at more options in a couple weeks. Next slide. And yeah, and just know it's site specific. So if you are in a very wet area, having raised beds, this is out in Hana. Next slide. And this is on our farm, how we do our raised beds, because also our pathways can fill up with water. And so having a dry area for them, for the plants is really vital. Next slide. And soil testing, if you haven't already, I do recommend soil testing so you can actually feed based on your soil test. We will talk about soil fertility and what you could give your plants, but probably by the time, we get to the next class, you might be too late to soil test and feed appropriately. And so I would recommend going out and getting a soil test sooner than later. I personally use A&L Labs, which you can find online, and they will tell you exactly how to do it. Next slide. And yeah, just considering borders, diversity, beneficial insects, we're getting some diversity through what we're planting, but incorporating things that attract pollinators and um, attract beneficial insects to help against some pests that we might be dealing with. Next slide. This is a vetiver border planting example, also can be used as mulch. Next slide. And here's comfrey used on a hillside. So one terraces the hillsides, but then offers the comfrey for soil stabilization, offers it for mulch, offers it for nutrient cycling, and vetiver at the bottom. And next slide. And that's all we got for right now. So yeah, thank you all, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Evan. All right. So we are at 6:55, so it looks like we'll probably be going a little bit late. Hope you guys are able to stay on, but if you are not, we are recording, so that will be available if you have to hop off at 7. We'll be moving on to Nancy's presentation on the Pomojo green beans.
Hey, so this is an amazing bean. I have never grown it until right now, and I am extremely impressed with it. Next slide. So the University of Hawaii, over the last 40 years, has been breeding green beans. They have bred 4 different green beans in the last 40 years. And this one, the Pomojo, is the latest one. So the beans that they have bred are Lualua Lei, and then there's Hawaiian Wonder and Manoa Wonder, and ending with the Pomojo, and they all build on each other. And so each one of these beans took 10, 15 years of different breeding and crossing back with other breeds, other varieties from other places in the world. And so this particular one was bred by Dick Hartman. He wanted to improve the Hawaiian Wonder and the Manoa Wonder because they were a little stringy and they didn't have as good a disease resistance as he was looking for. So he crossed the Manoa Wonder in 1970 with a bean from Hungary, and it actually improved the length of the green bean, and also it became much less stringless. So then he back crossed and crossed and made selections for 10 years. And then that population was grown out for another 7 generations. And then in 1980, he did yield trials with both the Manoa Wonder, the Hawaiian Wonder, and the Pomojo at 5 stations. And the Pomojo was superior in every way. Next slide, please. So this is the Pomojo. It reminds me of the like Italian Romano bean. It's long and flat. It's extremely beany tasting. I never grown it before. I usually grow the Alan Chadwick Blue Lake, but this one has an amazing beany flavor and is very, very tender and completely stringless. And it's also resistant to the root knot nematode, in case you have any of those around. We all do, of course, and the Rickensonia fungi. Next slide. So this center photograph here is what I decided to put in just as a little example for myself because I hadn't grown it this one before. So one thing that you need to do with green beans is you need to find a location in your garden or in your field that is sunny all day. And you really need to think about wind. because the wind is going to blow on that trellis. This trellis that you see right there is 8 feet tall, and I would say that your trellis needs to be 8 feet tall. That one is about 5 feet wide, and that is made from the the cattle fencing that I buy at Lowe's. It's a 16-foot long piece. I cut it in half and use that because it's galvanized steel and it lasts forever and it doesn't rust. So that's a really good trellis. But before you put your trellis up, you need to remove weeds, obviously, from the space that you're going to be growing in. I loosened up my soil around that trellis with my garden fork, and then I added some amendments that I'll tell you about in a minute. And then I put the trellis up with 2 sturdy steel poles that are tied onto that trellis. And actually, this trellis is facing north-south. And, last weekend we had the big storm. This trellis was right on the edge of my property, and 40-mile-an-hour winds were blowing into that trellis. It was completely covered with my seed, and it held. So it's really important that you put your stakes, that you position your trellis not into the wind like I did. I wasn't expecting a storm. Usually Kona is very, very quiet. So, but it did work. Then once the bed is made, the trellis is put on it. I make a trench about 4 inches from that trellis. You don't want your trench to be too far away because then the beans will have a hard time finding the trellis. And so on both sides, I make a trench and I put, probably 2 inches of compost in the bottom of that or some other amendments. Here's some other, next slide, please. There's so many ways to make trellises, and you'll come up with some brilliant idea, I'm sure. You can see trellises can be made like a teepee pole, but usually if you're using the string method, one bean is planted for each string. So there's plenty of ideas out there on the internet that you can take a look at. Next slide. So some of the amendments that I used to prepare my beds were I used my own screen compost that I make from my farm. I used some wood ash, basalt rock powder, and that's what I made. That's what I used for this planting, but you could use a small amount of manure, not very much, well rotted, or any other amendments that work for you. Worm castings. I put bones through the fire and sprinkle some calcium in there. And when I make it's always a good idea to start thinking about like what your mulch is going to be for that bed, because the beans are going to need some kind of a light mulch around the whole surface to keep the moisture in the soil. I like to take my mower out and just run it over some dry leaves, and they become tiny, tiny little pieces, or bamboo leaves, or comfrey, vetiver. Yeah, just exactly what Evan was just talking about. Any of those leaves chopped up make a wonderful mulch. And sometimes if I don't have access to leaves, I just go out and buy a bale of hay and I use it for the whole season. I keep it covered from the rain until I use it, and that seems to work too. Next slide. And the last thing is just planting your beans. So you've chosen your place. It's in full sun. You've amended your soil on both sides of the trellis. You've made a trench, and now you're going to you can soak your seeds overnight or not. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. I think it might be fun to try maybe soaking half of the seed that's going on one side and maybe on the other side not soaking the seed and see if it makes any difference. Um, I plant my I put mm, well on that trellis I planted 20 beans, so I planted 10 on a side. So that was about 6 inches apart, 4 to 6 inches apart. And in my little trench that I've put my compost in, I lay my beans down on top of it about 4 inches apart. And then I just push those beans into the compost and cover it lightly because beans should be, about an inch deep. Gently water, keep slightly moist. And after the first beans actually are extremely leafy and they don't like to go dry. So make sure that your beans are watered, but lightly watered. Yeah. And I usually don't put the mulch around my beans until the beans pop up and they appear because I have seen beans struggle with too much mulch around them to come out of the ground. So as soon as your beans are up and they have two true leaves, then I would put moisture around the whole thing. So it's going to take about 2 months to start harvesting. It could take 50 days. It's pretty fast. Your isolation distances from other beans would be 10 to 20 feet. And variety maintenance for beans is only 5 to 10 plants, and genetic preservation is only 20. So if you have a 5 foot trellis that's 8 feet tall and you put 10 beans on each side, you're going to have enough for genetic preservation for your beans. Next slide. And this is the last slide. Oh. Anyway, this is what the beans are looking like right now. And
Nice.
they're beautiful. And it looks like on that they're ready. I'm starting to pick them. So I planted them on November 21st. So it's already ready to pick. It looks like there's about 150 to 180 beans on my trellis, and each bean has 8 seeds. So it's going to be a lot of seeds. Thank you. That's it.
Mahalo, Nancy. All right, to close us out tonight, we have Glenn doing his presentation on the Manoa lettuce.
All right. Um, Great presentation so far. I learned a lot. Actually, Marielle should be giving this presentation because her husband is a very large lettuce grower. Um, so I'm focusing my talk on Manoa lettuce. I'm from Manoa Valley. I used to play in the old Manoa lettuce fields. They're raised beds about 2 feet high, and we used to play hide and seek over there with some of the lettuce growers' children in elementary school. I start off next. I usually start off with a saying, and this one is from Robert Louis Stevenson. Sometimes we focus on the harvesting and we forget about planting. I do that a lot. We really got to focus on planting all the time. Next week is my planting time. I have about 4 or 5 trays full of seedlings right now, and so getting ready for that. Hopefully the weather doesn't go south. We're actually moving into the month of Kaulua on the Hawaiian calendar, which means the month of two minds. It could be beautiful one minute and all hell breaking loose like this past weekend. So you have to be ready. Next. This is a Manoa lettuce mix. I think we still have some in the Seed Growers Network. This was in a trial in Waimanalo for a seed vegetable breeding workshop, and I think some of you may have been there. I know Tasha was there. Next. I really get involved in the history of a plant. I want to know where it came from, what kind of climate is there. Um, and lettuce has been around for about 7,000 years, cultivated lettuce. And origins are in the Middle East, in the Fertile Crescent, the Egyptian wall murals, the Min, the god of fertility, depict lettuce around 2700 BC, and more like a romaine. And these plants had sexual connotations. They consume lettuce and it improves sexual stamina. And I hope you folks don't all run out and buy out all the lettuce in the market right now. The lettuce actually was used first for oil. So the wild seeds were used for medicine, cooking, and mummification. Um, the Egyptians started breeding it, and the leaves were less bitter and more palatable. And the plants were more tall and upright with separate leaves rather than heads. The Greeks learned how to grow it from the Egyptians, and they used it as a sedative and served as a salad at the beginning of meals. And they continue to improve on the lettuce. The Greeks passed it on to the Romans, and who named the plant lactuca, which means like lactose milk because of its white sap. And so we today we call it lactuca. That's the Latin name for lettuce, lactuca sativa, I think it is. And lettuce regain its association with sexual potency. So, like the Egyptians, they believed that give them stamina. They took advantage of the medicinal qualities and they serve it before meals and also after meals. Next. This is there's so many lettuce varieties. That's why when I looked at that list of what's left today of lettuces, there's hundreds of lettuces. Next. The history goes so long, I cannot even believe it, but the Romans further developed lettuce for better tasting leaves, and in 77 AD, Pliny the Elder recorded numerous cultivars in his natural history, and he mentioned the black lettuce is sold in the month of January, the white is in March, and they're fit for transplanting at the end of a couple months. So a lot of different types of lettuce. Fresh young lettuces were served in salads, and the large, tough ones were cooked and served with vinegar and oil, which we still do today. Next. And this is actually yesterday. And you have the reds, which are the oak leaves. You have the little smaller ones that are butterheads, and the larger ones are romaine. That's the one called concept. Next. Okay, so lettuce traveled with the Romans in the Roman conquest into Western Europe and east all the way to China, establishing itself at multiple points along the way. When it reached Britain, the women were afraid of eating it because they believed it caused barrenness if you eat it in excess. And then in the fifth century, stem lettuce was recorded in China, and they still eat stem lettuce in China. And it's interesting because China doesn't have to deal with rat lungworm because they cook all their lettuce. And so we call it asparagus lettuce or celtis, and only recently become available in the United States. Next. So this is a celtis that I grew about 5 years ago. It's called Krakowiensis. I think this is from France. This guy is huge. If on the bottom of the picture, you see my top of my pick. This guy's about 2 feet tall and 2 feet wide. I never tasted it because I was afraid of it. Next. So in 1400, the loose leaf lettuces such as butterhead and crisp head were being developed in Europe. And it was still limited to Europe, Asia, and Africa. And then in Europe, the French termed the stem lettuce as romaine, which we still use that name today. In the 1600s, the Europeans started developing the crisp head lettuces as well as the red speckled types. There's some German varieties. Frolinkus is one of them. The red and green oak leaf and the curled leaf lettuces. And these were the main centers of breeding: France, Holland, and Italy. And we still have some of those coming into Hawaii, the varieties coming into the United States today. Not sure when it got to the Americas, but it spread through North and South America. In the mid-1900s, with the advent of rail trains, California started producing a lot of lettuce, and now we're shipping it all over the United States. And so now you have California, especially Salinas and Imperial Valley, called the salad bowl capital of the world. And there's also winter production in Yuma, Arizona. Next. Then Thomas Jefferson grew like 17 different varieties of lettuce. And brown Dutch was his favorite from Holland. A lot of varieties that he developed in the Netherlands, even today. A lot of the varieties from Johnny's from the Netherlands. The the parent of the Boston lettuces was his favorite. They have Boston bib and butter types, which Manoa is from these types of lines. Next. So this is my breakdown of types of lettuces. Some people have different breakdowns. Cause or romaine, the crisp head, the head lettuces, the loose leaf. The Batavian are more of a thicker leaf. They're almost like a crisp head leaf in a leaf lettuce. The Batavians were developed by the French in the southern part of France. Butterhead is still one of the favorites. Oak leaf is very heat tolerant. The Celtis and then the oil seeds. Next. Many of the lettuces are crosses from different types. So this is a Mayan jaguar from Wild Garden Seed in Oregon. This is a cross between a butterhead, a romaine, and an oak leaf. This is another one, Pandero, which is a romaine and a leaf lettuce. So a lot of the lettuces are crosses all over the place. I should mention that all lettuces are not hybrids, so you can save the seeds. However, some of them are patented, so you can't sell them. Lettuce is strongly self-pollinating. This is the next one. Next slide. Yeah, Pandero, next. Okay, this one, yeah. So this is Manoa lettuce down in Waimanalo Experiment Station. In the lowlands, they'll be more leafy. In the uplands, they'll form a head. I'll talk a little bit about Manoa lettuce. Next. So Manoa lettuce was derived from green mignonette. And in fact, I just harvested some green mignonette seeds today. A lettuce introduced in seed catalogs in the late 1800s by Peter Henderson and Company. You got to read about this guy. This guy is just amazing. I mean, he just started this whole industry. He started doing greenhouses, seed catalogs, and he was farming in Bergen, New Jersey. There's also accounts of green mignonette coming from the Philippines and also from France. I think it's from France, but I'm not too sure. Known for its heat tolerance, compact habit, and soft leaves. And it's unclear how it found its way to Hawaii, but it's been growing in Hawaii for many generations. They were doing breeding with Manoa lettuce in the 40s, so it must have been around for a while. I remember growing up, they grew it in Waianae and Hawaii Kai. And it's real interesting because these areas, you had access to a very important fertilizer, chicken manure. And so a lot of them use chicken manure to grow lettuce. So the original Manoa lettuce was more of a leafy type lettuce. And in the late 80s, I was going to school at that time, or I just finished in the late 70s, actually. But I remember Dr. Hartman, and I used to talk story with him. He sought to improve Manoa lettuce to increase the shelf life, because the problem is that the lettuce would fall apart at the store. The leaves would start falling off. And so he wanted to make a little head, but by bringing in that head characteristic, he brought in tip burn. So tip burn is a big problem on Manoa lettuce. I'll explain on a later slide. So this is UH Manoa lettuce. And you can see how the leaves can fall off. You can run into a real problem with that on the shelf. The lettuce is very light. It's really hard to make money on Manoa lettuce, but people just love it and they're willing to pay a good price. On Molokai, sometimes they'll sell it for about $5.99 a pound in the store. Okay, so some of the challenges we deal with in Hawaii, knowing where the plant came from is really important. The climate that lettuce came from. So lettuce likes warm days and cool nights. We have hot days and warm nights. And because of this, the plants cannot rest at night and build up their carbohydrates. So they go through what is called cardiac arrest, I guess, and they just crash. The other problem is tip burn from high temperatures that accelerate the metabolic rate of the plant, and the plants cannot physically take up nutrients fast enough. So what happens is some of the nutrients don't get to the tips of the leaves, and you get this necrosis. You have the dying of the leaves. High nitrogen can also create a problem by creating an imbalance. What you have is this fluffy leaf that grows, and you have a deficiency of calcium, and you have tip burn again. Uh, Hot weather, early bolting is a problem in some varieties. We're always looking for bolt tolerant varieties. I'm constantly developing new varieties of lettuce to find the one. Have some coming out real soon. Under heat stress conditions, the lettuce has a real milky taste. So what they used to do in Hawaii is they use misters, and they have mist, and they could grow it under what I call manoa conditions. It almost rains every morning in Manoa, and you have this misty rains. And that's why in Salinas Valley, that's that same kind of weather. The fall comes in, it rains a little in the morning, then fall comes back in the afternoon, and just the ideal weather for growing lettuce. A lot of diseases in the winter months. We have a virus called spotted wilt that basically wiped out the lettuce industry back in the early 90s in Maui, and as well as on the Big Island. On Maui, they were growing tomatoes and lettuce together, and both of those, that was a rotation, and both of those crops were susceptible to spotted wilt, and it just spread rampant and just wiped out the industry. And we have a sclerotinia leaf drop. We have the leaves dropping off the bottom in the winter months from too much rain. We have downy mildew on the higher elevations and powdery mildew on the lower elevations. Next. So nutrition requirements. I see everybody really got into this, and I kind of just threw this slide together looking at what I use. The soil pH is 6 to 6.2. That's about what my soil is, so I don't have to really adjust the pH. Chicken manure I use a lot now. Fish meal or fish emulsion. Foliar feeding with fish emulsion, light doses. I think Evan mentioned the same thing. I just did some today. My wife doesn't enjoy it because I stink up the whole place. Next slide. I'm sorry. Okay. Biochar. I use biochar. I have a 3-foot by 3-foot bale of a bin of biochar. So I use that. Bone meal. If you use conventional fertilizers, we can use 16, 10, 30, 10, but the lettuce doesn't like the salts, so they don't do as well. They'll kind of die back a little bit, and they kind of slow down and then start up when the salt washes away. Ideally, fertilizer should be incorporated into the soil. Okay, next. Okay, I needed to mention this precautions in preparing and consuming lettuce due to the threat of red lungworm. We need to really watch out if you have slugs, especially if you're in a wet area like Hana, upcountry Maui, some of Puna. You need to really watch for slugs. And so if you have these kind of situations, you want to be able to wash it outside in bright light, and you bring it in the house, wash it under bright light, wash individual leaves, and make sure you don't bring the slugs around. Okay, next. This is tip burn on mono lettuce. This is common also in romaine lettuce coming in from the mainland during the hot months. You see brown tips, black tips, and sometimes the center of the lettuce is also blackened. Next, know your soil. If you go to you Google Hawaii Soil Atlas, and it's an interactive site. You can look at the different islands, you can identify where you are, and you can press the button, and it'll tell you what soil you have. Hawaii has more soils than any place, different types of soils than any place in the world, probably over 160 soils. They're still discovering more in Hamakua. My soil is oxosol, that's the red soils you find in Wahiwa, Kunia, Mililani, those areas. This is a Lahaina series. They're highly weathered. They're low base saturation, which means they don't hold some of the key nutrients such as calcium, magnesium, potassium. Low cation exchange capacity. That means the nutrients are not floating around where the plants can grab it. and have a tendency to either wash away or lock it up. The soil, my soil is 6.4. It has high potassium, adequate magnesium, phosphorus, and low calcium. So I need to put in calcium, and I need to put in nitrogen, but that's about it. Next. So need to, understand your soil and look at what is needed. So in short of calcium, I go in with gypsum because my pH is good. If your pH is low, and every time you're adding things to the soil, you're usually adding acid. So you might want to put ground coral. You can do it in the hole. You can do it in the bowl. I don't broadcast because it's just too expensive. Manure to break down organic matter and feed milk microbes. Chicken manure works really well. I also use fish emulsion when needed, especially on the seedlings. The organic matter is really important in this soil. If you don't have organic matter, a lot of times the soil won't hold the nutrients. It kind of runs away. Um, so it allows for nutrient exchange, acts as a habitat for microbes, overcomes shortcomings of my soil, which is a cation exchange capacity and base saturation. So I depend on grasses and crop residue. Soil moisture is important in keeping the soil alive and thriving. Not only that, but the microbes. And I notice even with taro, when the leaves cover the soil, oh man, the soil gets fluffy. Other nutrients, catalysts, biochar, worm castings, chicken manure, in the potting mix or transplanting hole. Okay, so this is what happens in the rainy season. I'll get like 6 feet high grass, guinea grass, and I'll go in and just mow it down. And this is an area that was mowed, and you just have next. Oh shucks, I keep on forgetting to say next. So this is the guinea grass that I mow, and then this is a mowed field, and then the next one is just a mattress of green in the field. Then I'll go in and rototill and set up an area. I might disc if it's too thick. Next. And then this is what the soil looks like. We have all this organic matter in the soil, and I have some taro in the field. I have this field is still open right now and just waiting for everything to break down, and then put in some vegetables in this one. Next. And for taro, what I do is I just lime in the lines, and it works really well. Or lime or this one had lime because this field was slightly lower. Okay, next. Germination testing. This is really important. We're probably going to cover it at a later time, but if you're sowing a lot of seeds, it might be a good idea to test your viability. The worst thing that can happen, you get all your fields set up, you're ready to go, you start the seeds, and the seeds aren't good. Okay. And a lot of places in Hawaii where you buy seeds, they're not storing it right. I think at Whole Foods at Kahala one time they had the seeds outside the store and the sun shining on the packets. And a lot of times they're not refrigerated, so the seeds may not be viable, even with the date showing it's viable. I soak paper towel with water, then squeeze and remove the excess. I lay out 25 seeds. I fold it close. I put it in a sandwich bag. I write the name and the date. I start checking in 3 days. I just checked some right now. I'm going to check some more tomorrow. When most are germinated, count how many germinated and multiply it by 4. This is your germination percentage. Anything 70% or higher is considered acceptable for lettuce. There's standards, national standards that we have to meet as seed growers in order to sell the seeds. Next. So this is the germination testing I was doing this weekend. I got, 15 or 20 different varieties I'm testing out right now. And next. And this is what came out on the lettuce 3 days after. This lettuce, this is Hilo Green, is the new variety I'm working with, developed by Russell Nagata, still making selections. This is a heat-tolerant butterhead. Some of them look exactly like Mano lettuce. Next. So potting mix, everybody talks about number 4. I use 10 gallons. I use 2 cups of worm castings, 1 cup. This is not hard and fast. Sometimes I look at it, or time of year, I might add a little bit more stuff. Um, in the wintertime, I need to add some coir or perlite because the this potting mix holds too much water. I start all my seeds out in the open. I got a table with all my seedlings on it. I'll drench with 1 gallon dilute fish emulsion, 1 teaspoon to a gallon, and then I'll give plants this mix every week. The fish emulsion. Next, sowing seeds. I use a plastomer or prop tech tray. My plastomer trays are over 35 years old. I use the same tray on 1.5, 1.25 cells, I think. I have the plantel cells, which are 1 inch, a little too small for me. You can use the cheaper single use. I don't like to use that. Got plastics all over the place. Um, I fill the trays with potting mix. I shake it in, but don't force the media into the cells because they need to breathe. And sometimes you have problems with water draining, especially in the plastomer trays. I use a pencil eraser in and make small indentations for each cell, about 1/4 inch deep. I drop the seed in it and I don't cover it. I just sprinkle it with water and it closes itself. Um, don't allow the cells to dry out. I irrigate twice daily and more if we have hot and dry days. Okay, next. These are some Manoa leopard. These are spotted Manoa lettuce on the right side. This is pak choi on the left. Next. This is what happens when you have a storm like this past weekend. And Manoa lettuce was the only one that got damaged. That's how delicate it is. Next. So depending on how much lettuce I start, and especially the time of year, in the wintertime, I can get away with doing a whole bunch of seeds like this. The price of potting mix is ridiculous. For a bale, it's probably up to $75 a bale. So you got to be really frugal in terms of using potting mix. And you don't want to, if you're going to do seedlings, you don't want to reuse potting mix. You can use it for transplanting larger plants, but not potting for seedlings, for seeds. Next. And sometimes I do it like this. If I know we're going to have a lot of overcast weather, they won't have too much transplanting shock, I'll plant late afternoon, especially if I know it's going to rain, I'll plant late afternoon and I can get away with murder, actually. Next. Sometimes what I do is I make selections at this stage. If I want a certain color, I'll pull it out, I'll separate them, and I'll evaluate them, and I'll keep the best ones for seeds. So you have some spotted ones in here. This is actually a variety called Manoa leopard, developed by a friend of mine, Frank Martin, Wild Garden Seeds in Oregon. I sent him Manoa lettuce. I said, hey, cross it with yours. And he's gone ape. He's got like 20 different selections that he developed out of this cross. Next. So this is Saturday. So on the left, you have a Nui Nui, and on the right, you have Manoa. This is a little too far from Manoa. This is a 1 foot apart. Manoa can be planted, say, 10 inches, about 10 inches apart. But I was planting this whole 150-foot row for seed production, and I was evaluating all the plants, so I planted them all 1 foot apart. Next. So I kind of talked a little bit about this. Transplant in the late afternoon to minimize transplant shock. Overcast or rainy days are a bonus. Transplant when seedling holds potting mix together. Check the bottom of the tray to inspect roots. If they're coming on the bottom, it's ready to transplant. It's better to transplant earlier than later when the seedling is pot bound because they'll be slow to take off. You can use a butter knife, what I use to get the thing out. Give dilute fish emulsion 3 days after transplant. Again, Manoa lettuce is a small frame plant, so you can, plant it a little bit closer. You can stagger plants when planting in two sides of a drip line and a triangle. In a wet season, it's important to have good air circulation, so you may want to put it a little bit farther. They love this weather right now with this hot days and cool nights. They grow overnight. So then the plants start bolting. This is a red flamingo starting to bolt. Next. And then next, this is a Mano leopard actually starting to bolt. I was doing a trial in the summertime to see which ones would be the last to bolt. Next, this is a sister to a Nui Nui called Calvella, and this guy does not bolt. This is a 150-foot roll with all these lettuces from mostly from Oregon, all the different varieties, and this guy did not bolt. I mean, I had to abandon this guy, but you have bolt tolerant varieties that are adapted to Hawaii, but you want to also look at the taste and other attributes. Next. So this is the lettuce flowers, nice yellow daisies. This is uh, they're sticky. They have a lot of milky sap. They're strongly self-pollinators. The chances of them crossing are really slim. I tried a lot of times to plant two different varieties next to each other to make new varieties of seeds. Wasn't successful. Next picture. So this is lettuce lettuce production, lettuce seed production. This was a winter month, so the rains were just kind of raising hell, but I still can harvest in the winter time. Okay, so these are the seed heads I was actually selecting for that heat tolerance, um, and they seem to be doing. These were the last of the Mohicans. These were like 7 plants out of a 150-foot row that are the last ones to boom. Okay, next. Then I'll harvest the seeds, separate them out. Um, and then this is the seed heads drying. They have these white tufts and they have these little balls inside. And if you go in there and you kind of grab a little ball and you rub it together, they feel gritty. And that's the seeds. Next. And this is actually some seeds of the green mignonette that I harvested yesterday. Um, and if you grab it, it'll just, you can feel all the seeds in there. Next. And this is mostly clean seeds. You can go one step further, um, and clean it a little bit more. I have this this seed screen, a special seed screen for lettuce. It's called a herringbone. I wish I could. I forgot to put it on the slides. Next, try to test out these new varieties that I have. So I gave some to Jerry Sugano and Jensen, and we did a trial in Pomoho. This was in about 2014, I think, and evaluated the different varieties, the green Manoa leopard, the Hilo green, which I'm working on now. And then Manoa 77 is an interesting one. About 5 years ago, they found a canister of seeds at UH, one of the refrigerators, opened up the can, and it was 100% germination. Um, okay, and then this is Manoa leopard. I think I'm done already. I just showing a fast next. Maybe you can just fly through the next slides to show people. This is Manoa leopard. This is the variability of the plant. Oh, this one. Okay, this is the planting I have of the different varieties, and I'm selecting. These are the flags where I'm selecting. On the left, I have seeds growing on this trellis. This is 3 varieties of snow peas and pomo, pole beans, and some lettuce and cucumbers. I mean, tomatoes and cucumbers on the end. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I learned so much. That's really fun to learn so much about lettuce. I'm surrounded by it all the time. I don't appreciate it. Well, for those of you who are still with us, thanks for sticking it out. You're welcome to hang out for another couple of minutes if you have any questions, but we've been doing our best to answer everyone's questions in the chat. And also thank you to Evan for transferring those over to our shared Q&A document if you ever want to revisit the answers to the questions you've been asking. Otherwise, have a great evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us. Pedro, go ahead.
It was a very good class. I just have a question because in March 12th, I'll be traveling to Brazil with my family, my kids, and I haven't been there in a long time, almost 2 decades. So I don't know. I like to understand more the timing for the crops to be on the ground, and because yeah, my field is going on right now. I'm gonna terminate it in a couple weeks. So I just wanna organize myself better.
We do anticipate everyone being planted or seeded by February 19th.
Okay.
So that would be the seeding process, and then from there it just kind of depends when the plants are ready. Obviously the beans are ideally going right in the garden right away, direct seeded. Lettuce is going to come ready pretty quick. And kale also, in the medium range, but quick also. And then you know, the the tomatoes 4 to 6 weeks later, which would put you, just after March 12th or so.
Okay.
Great. Are there any other questions?
I have one more. There's one more. For the tomato, over here we all grow like with screen houses. Are we gonna need a screen house for that?
No, you don't need a screen house. It's a cherry tomato. Cherry tomatoes don't have the same pest pressure as the large tomatoes. It's up to you if you want to grow in the screen house. It's totally fine to do that. But it's also fine to put in the field. I am actually doing my cherries in our greenhouse for moisture control because it doesn't get rained on and because we're planting so early when it's still cold and rainy. I'm going with the greenhouse just to reduce any risks of late blight.
Okay, thank you guys. Good night.
Good night, Pedro.
All right. Last call for questions. All right. Mahalo. Have a good night, everyone. I will try and get this video posted. So you can go to the YouTube playlist link that's in your syllabus if you would like to review the recording tomorrow or in the future. All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay, aloha.
Aloha.
Good night.